Amina Johnson had spent the last 7 years sitting behind the same sewing machine in the same narrow tailoring shop on a crowded street in downtown Nairobi. Every morning before sunrise, she unlocked the faded glass door, swept the sidewalk outside, and arranged completed garments on metal racks that had become older than some of her customers. The city around her moved quickly. New businesses opened. Expensive boutiques appeared. Large fashion chains expanded into every shopping district. Yet Amina remained where she had always been, quietly repairing clothes, altering suits, and helping ordinary people look their best for weddings, interviews, graduations, and important moments in life. Most people never notice her. To them, she was simply another tailor struggling to survive in a city full of competition. What nobody saw was the discipline behind her work. She arrived first and left last. She measured every customer twice. She checked every stitch before delivering an order. Even when people delayed payments or complained unfairly, she responded with patience. Business had become increasingly difficult after a luxury fashion company opened less than 2 blocks away. Their massive advertising campaign attracted wealthy customers who previously visited independent tailors like Amina. Within 6 months, her income had fallen almost 40%. Bills began piling up. Rent increased. Electricity costs climbed. Some evenings she sat alone after closing, staring at the accounts book and wondering how much longer she could continue. Yet every time she considered giving up, she remembered her mother's words. Character is built on the days nobody applauds you. Those words stayed with her through every hardship. On a rainy Thursday evening, after paying suppliers and calculating expenses, Amina discovered she had barely enough money left to cover groceries for the week. Outside, headlights reflected across wet pavement, while office workers hurried toward buses and taxis. Inside the small shop, silence surrounded her. She looked around at the sewing machine, the measuring tapes, the fabric rolls, and the walls she had painted herself years earlier. Everything represented sacrifice. Everything represented hope. She did not know it yet, but the next customer to enter her shop would alter the direction of her entire life. Sometimes extraordinary opportunities arrive disguised as ordinary moments, and sometimes the people who change our future walk to the door, looking exactly like everyone else. The following afternoon appeared completely normal. Traffic filled the streets. Vendors sold snacks along the sidewalks. Office workers hurried between meetings. Amina spent most of the day shortening trousers and repairing jackets. Around 4 o'clock, a black luxury SUV stopped directly in front of her shop. She noticed it briefly, but returned to work. Expensive vehicles occasionally passed through the district. There was nothing unusual about that. What caught her attention was the elderly man who stepped out. He was dressed elegantly, but carried himself without arrogance. His suit looked expensive enough to cost more than several months of her rent. Yet one sleeve had been badly torn, as if it caught on metal. The man entered quietly and placed a jacket on her work table. "Can this be repaired today?" he asked. Amina examined the damage carefully. The fabric was exceptional quality. Matching the stitching perfectly would require patience and skill. Many tailors would refuse because any mistake could ruin an extremely valuable garment. But she simply nodded. "Yes, it can." The stranger seemed relieved. "How much will it cost?" She studied the tear again. It would require less than 30 minutes. "Nothing," she replied. The man looked surprised. "Nothing." She smiled gently. "It's a small repair. Charging for this wouldn't feel right." For several seconds, he simply watched her. Most people in the city searched constantly for opportunities to earn more money. Yet this woman, whose modest shop clearly wasn't making her rich, was refusing payment. He sat quietly while she worked. Her concentration never broke. Every stitch matched the original pattern perfectly. Every detail received full attention. When she finished, the tear had disappeared completely. The jacket looked untouched. The man inspected the sleeve carefully before smiling. "You're very talented." Amina laughed softly. "Talent helps. Customers help more." The stranger smiled again, but there was something thoughtful behind his expression now, as if he had learned something important. He thanked her and prepared to leave. At the doorway, he paused briefly. "What's your name?" "Amina Johnson." He nodded. "Thank you, Miss Johnson." Then he walked away. Neither exchanged any additional information. Neither discussed business. Neither knew that this brief encounter was about to trigger events that would capture attention across the entire city. The next morning began with confusion. Amina arrived shortly before 8 o'clock, expecting another ordinary workday. Instead, she found several luxury vehicles parked outside her shop. Men and women in professional business attire stood nearby, speaking quietly into phones. Neighbors watched from storefronts across the street. Some people were already recording videos. For a moment, panic rushed through her mind. Had something gone wrong with the suit? Had she unknowingly damaged an expensive garment? As she approached, one of the men stepped forward politely. "Miss Amina Johnson?" She nodded cautiously. The man handed her a business card. The moment she read the name, her stomach tightened. David Mensa, the billionaire founder of Mensa Holdings, one of the wealthiest and most influential business leaders in East Africa. His companies own office towers, shopping centers, technology firms, manufacturing facilities, and investment groups across multiple countries. His face appeared regularly in newspapers and business magazines. Suddenly, she recognized the elderly customer from yesterday. The lawyer smiled professionally. "Mr. Mensa would like to meet with you today." Around them, curiosity intensified. Shop owners emerged from nearby businesses. Pedestrians slowed down. Whispers spread rapidly. Why would one of the richest men in Africa send lawyers to a struggling tailor? Amina's mind searched desperately for explanations. None made sense. The lawyer escorted her into one of the waiting vehicles. As they drove through Nairobi's financial district, towering skyscrapers rose above the streets. Glass buildings reflected sunlight across the skyline. Everything felt unreal. She kept replaying yesterday's conversation in her mind, searching for clues she might have missed. Yet the interaction had seemed completely ordinary. A simple repair, a brief conversation, nothing more. When the vehicle finally entered the underground parking area of Mensa Holdings headquarters, Amina felt as though she had crossed into another world. Security personnel greeted them. Executives moved through marble hallways. Elevators climbed toward the upper floors where major decisions affecting millions of dollars were made daily. Somewhere above, a billionaire was waiting to speak with her, and she still had absolutely no idea why. David Mensa's office occupied an entire corner of the building's highest executive floor. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked Nairobi's skyline in every direction. The office itself was elegant, but surprisingly simple. There were no unnecessary displays of wealth, no gold decorations, no excessive luxury. Only carefully selected furniture and shelves filled with books. David stood near the windows when Amina entered. He turned and greeted her warmly. "Thank you for coming." She sat across from him, still uncertain about the reason for the meeting. The billionaire smiled. "Yesterday, you repaired my suit." Amina nodded. "Yes, sir." "And you refused payment." She hesitated. It was a small repair. David leaned back thoughtfully. "Do you know how many businesses I've visited over the last 3 months?" She shook her head. 27. Amina looked confused. The billionaire continued. "I wasn't searching for a tailor. I was searching for a person." The statement hung in the air. He explained his foundation plan to launch a major vocational training initiative across multiple African cities. The project would teach practical skills to thousands of young people from disadvantaged backgrounds. Fashion design, tailoring, manufacturing, entrepreneurship, and business management. The goal wasn't charity. It was opportunity. David needed someone to help lead the program. Not a celebrity. Not an executive. Not someone skilled at giving speeches. Someone honest. Someone talented. Someone who cared about quality, even when nobody important was watching. For months, he had quietly visited businesses across the city, observing, testing, learning. Yesterday's torn sleeve had been intentional. Most people overcharge him after recognizing the value of the garment. Others treated him differently when they discovered his identity. A few refused to help entirely. But Amina never asked who he was. She never looked for a personal gain. She simply solved a problem because someone needed help. David smiled. "That told me everything I needed to know." Amina stared at him in disbelief. The entire conversation felt impossible. She was a struggling tailor trying to keep a small shop open. Why would someone like David Mensa trust her with anything important? Yet the billionaire's expression remained serious. He wasn't joking. He wasn't testing her. He genuinely believed she belonged in a position she had never imagined for herself. Then David revealed a proposal that would change everything. His foundation planned to establish a network of vocational academies in major African cities. Thousands of students would receive free training. Graduates would gain access to employment opportunities, startup funding, mentorship programs, and business resources. The initiative represented one of the largest projects his foundation had ever undertaken, and he wanted Amina Johnson to become its founding director. For several moments, she genuinely believed she had misunderstood. A billionaire could hire experienced executives from anywhere in the world. He could recruit university professors, fashion industry leaders, or international consultants. Instead, he was offering a role to a woman running a small tailoring shop. David seemed to anticipate her doubts. Leadership isn't about titles, he said. It's about values. Skills can be taught. Character cannot. He explained that the academies needed someone who understood struggle firsthand. Someone who knew what it meant to build a future without advantages. Someone students could trust because she had lived a reality they were trying to escape. Emotion filled Amina's eyes. Years of sacrifice suddenly felt visible. Every difficult morning, every unpaid invoice, every moment she chose integrity over convenience. None of it had been wasted. David handed her a folder containing project details. The numbers alone were staggering. Budgets, facilities, staff, scholarships, partnerships. This wasn't merely a job offer. It was a chance to transform thousands of lives. As she looked through the documents, one realization settled firmly in her heart. Yesterday, she had repaired a torn sleeve for free because it felt like the right thing to do. Today, that simple decision had opened a door larger than anything she had ever imagined. Walking out of the skyscraper later that evening, she paused and looked back toward the building. The city lights were beginning to glow across Nairobi. Traffic flowed through the streets below. Somewhere among those lights, countless people were still struggling exactly as she had struggled. For the first time, she could see a future where she might help change that. And this was only the beginning. 3 months after accepting David Mensa's offer, Amina's life no longer resembled a life she had known before. The small tailoring shop still existed, but now it operated as the headquarters of a growing movement. Construction crews worked across Nairobi, Mombasa, and Kampala preparing the first vocational academies. Business leaders volunteered as mentors. Local media covered the initiative regularly. Thousands of applications arrived from young people hoping for an opportunity to learn skills that could change their futures. Every day, Amina attended meetings, reviewed plans, interviewed instructors, and worked late into the evening. Yet despite the sudden success surrounding her, she refused to change the habits that had shaped her. She still arrived early. She still listened carefully before making decisions. She still visited construction sites personally instead of relying entirely on reports. Employees quickly noticed something different about her leadership style. Most executives focus on numbers. Amina focused on people. She learned staff members' names. She remembered family details. She visited students before facilities even opened. Because of that, loyalty grew rapidly around her. Newspapers began publishing articles about the former tailor, who was helping transform vocational education. Television programs invited her for interviews. Social media users shared her story thousands of times. For many people, she became a symbol of what determination could achieve. But while public admiration increased, another emotion began growing elsewhere: jealousy. Across the city, executives from a luxury fashion corporation called Elite Threads watched her rise with frustration. Their company had dominated the market for years. They spent millions on advertising, celebrity endorsements, and public relations campaigns. Yet somehow a former tailor was receiving more attention than their entire organization. The person most disturbed by this was Elite Threads CEO Victor Okoye. Victor believed success belonged to people with power, connections, and influence. Seeing an ordinary tailor become a national figure offended everything he believed about business. Every article praising Amina felt like an insult. Every interview irritated him further. One evening, he threw a newspaper onto his desk after reading another feature about the vocational academies. His executives sat silently around the conference table. Finally, Victor spoke. Who exactly does she think she is? Nobody answered, because everyone in the room knew the question wasn't really about Amina. It was about a powerful man watching someone else's success receive the attention he wanted for himself. And dangerous people often make poor decisions when pride becomes involved. 6 months later, the first academy officially opened in Nairobi. The launch ceremony attracted government officials, journalists, investors, and community leaders. Hundreds of students filled the auditorium, wearing bright smiles and hopeful expressions. Many came from neighborhoods where opportunities rarely appeared. Some had never imagined attending any form of professional training program. Standing on stage beside David Mensah, Amina looked across the crowd and felt emotional. Every seat represented possibility. Every student represented a future that had not yet been written. When her speech ended, the audience stood and applauded. Cameras flashed. Reporters rushed forward with questions. The event dominated headlines the next morning. But among the celebration, an unexpected problem emerged. Several anonymous online accounts began spreading rumors. They claimed Amina lacked qualifications. They questioned how she received her position. Some suggested she had manipulated David Mensah. Others accused the academy of hiding financial misconduct despite having no evidence whatsoever. At first, the accusations seemed random, yet they multiplied quickly. New accounts appeared every day. False stories spread across social media platforms. Journalists began calling for comments. Amina tried ignoring the situation. David advised patience. Truth survives longer than lies, he said. But privately, she felt hurt. She had spent years building a reputation through hard work and honesty. Watching strangers attack her character felt deeply unfair. One evening, while reviewing online discussions, a member of the communications team noticed something unusual. Several anonymous accounts shared identical patterns. Similar language, similar timing, similar content. The attacks were coordinated. Someone was funding them. Someone wanted to damage Amina's reputation deliberately. The discovery transformed concern into suspicion, because random criticism was one thing. Organized sabotage was something entirely different. And somewhere in the city, a person with significant resources had decided Amina Johnson needed to fail. While the investigation into the online attacks continued, another challenge emerged unexpectedly. A wealthy investor withdrew support from one of the academy projects. Then a second investor postponed funding discussions. Soon after, 2 major suppliers canceled agreements without explanation. None of the decisions made sense. The academies remained successful. Financial reports were strong. Student enrollment exceeded expectations. Yet obstacles appeared from every direction. During a strategy meeting, David Mensah reviewed several reports quietly. Then he noticed something interesting. Every investor who suddenly changed positions had recently attended private business events hosted by elite threads. Every supplier cancellation occurred shortly after meetings with Victor Okoye's representatives. The pattern was impossible to ignore. David ordered a deeper investigation. What his team uncovered shocked even him. Victor had been conducting a systematic campaign against the academies. He pressured investors, influenced suppliers, funded online attacks, spread damaging rumors, all because he could not tolerate seeing Amina receive recognition. When David presented the evidence to Amina, she sat silently for several moments. "Why?" she finally asked. David sighed. "Because success exposes character. Some people are inspired when others succeed. Others feel threatened." The revelation disappointed her more than it angered her. She couldn't understand why someone with immense wealth and influence would dedicate energy toward hurting people trying to help students. Yet David understood perfectly. He had spent decades in business. He had seen talented individuals attacked not because they failed, but because they succeeded. Still, neither of them realized Victor's campaign was only the beginning, because while investigating his activities, David's team discovered something far more surprising. Victor wasn't merely interested in destroying the academies. He seemed unusually interested in Amina herself, almost as though he knew something about her that she didn't know. Several weeks later, Amina received an anonymous envelope delivered directly to her office. There was no return address, no accompanying message, only a collection of old documents and photographs. At first, she assumed it was another attempt to harass her. Then she examined the contents more carefully. The photograph showed a young woman standing beside a man Amina had never seen before. One image featured a newborn baby wrapped in a blanket. Another contained hospital records from over 30 years earlier. Her name appeared repeatedly throughout the documents. Confused, she continued reading. Slowly, her expression changed. According to the records, the woman who raised her might not have been her biological mother. The possibility felt impossible. Her mother had passed away years earlier. She had never suggested such a thing. Yet, the paperwork looked authentic. Dates matched. Signatures appeared legitimate. For the rest of the day, Amina struggled to focus. Questions filled her mind. Who sent the envelope? Why now? Was the information real? That evening, she showed everything to David. He reviewed the documents carefully before speaking. We need professional verification. Within days, private investigators began examining the records. Their findings raised even more questions. The hospital documents were genuine. Certain names appeared repeatedly, and one individual connected to the records currently lived in Nairobi. Amina suddenly found herself facing a mystery larger than any business challenge. The closer investigators looked, the more it appeared that someone had hidden important truths about her origins for decades. Yet the biggest surprise arrived when they identified the person most closely connected to those secrets. The name left both Amina and David speechless. Because it belonged to someone they already knew. The investigation reached a breakthrough one rainy evening. David invited Amina to a private meeting room after receiving the latest report. His expression alone told her the findings were significant. Slowly, he placed a file on the table. We confirm the documents are real. Amina felt her heart race. David opened the report. The woman who raised you loved you deeply. There's no doubt about that. She nodded silently. But she was not your biological mother. The room fell completely quiet. Then David revealed the name investigators had uncovered. Amina stared at him in disbelief. She genuinely thought she had heard incorrectly. The person connected to her birth records wasn't a stranger. It wasn't someone living overseas. It wasn't a forgotten relative. It was someone currently operating within Nairobi's business community. Someone powerful. Someone wealthy. Someone whose path had already crossed hers multiple times. Before Amina could process the revelation, another detail emerged. The anonymous envelope had not been sent by Victor Okoye. It had come from someone inside his organization. Someone trying to expose a secret that powerful people wanted buried. As rain tapped softly against the skyscraper windows, Amina realized her life was changing again. What began as a simple act of kindness toward a customer had evolved into something far larger. Business rivalries, hidden identities, long-buried family secrets. And somewhere ahead waited answers capable of changing everything she believed about her past. The question was no longer whether she would face challenges. The question was whether she was ready for the truth. Amina barely slept after learning that the woman who raised her was not her biological mother. Every memory from childhood suddenly felt different. Every family photograph seemed to contain questions she had never thought to ask. The following morning, she arrived at David Mensa's office before sunrise. The city was still waking up as she sat across from him, waiting for answers. David had spent the entire night reviewing investigation reports. When he finally opened the file, his expression carried the weight of information he knew would change her life forever. According to hospital records, Amina had been born in Nairobi General Hospital 32 years earlier during a difficult delivery. Her biological mother, a university student named Grace Adino, died less than 24 hours after giving birth. The father was listed as unknown, at least officially, but investigators had uncovered additional records that were never entered into the public system. Hidden correspondence, private letters, financial agreements. The evidence pointed toward a powerful businessman who had secretly paid to keep his connection to the child hidden. That man was still alive, still wealthy, still influential. For decades he had built an empire, while the daughter, he never acknowledged, struggled through life believing she'd been abandoned by fate. Amina listened in stunned silence. Her hands remained clasped tightly together as she tried to process what she was hearing. The woman she called mother had adopted her quietly after Grace's death. She had protected her, loved her, raised her without ever revealing the truth. Not because she wanted to deceive her, but because she promised Grace she would keep the child safe. As David explained the details, Amina felt conflicting emotions rise inside her. Gratitude, confusion, anger, sadness. She suddenly understood why her mother had always insisted that family was built through love rather than blood. Perhaps she had been preparing her for this truth all along. Yet one question remained unanswered. Who was the man who spent 30 years hiding from responsibility? David looked down at the file before speaking again. His name is Samuel Karanja. The name hit Amina like a physical force. Samuel Karanja wasn't merely wealthy. He was one of Nairobi's most powerful real estate developers, a man whose face appeared regularly on television, a man she had actually met twice during Academy fundraising events. And the realization that such a person might be her father left her speechless. 3 days later, a private DNA test confirmed what the investigators already suspected. Samuel Karanja was Amina's biological father. The result changed everything. For hours, she sat alone in her apartment staring at the report. Part of her wanted to throw it away and pretend none of it existed. Another part wanted immediate answers. How could man know he had a daughter and remain silent for 32 years? Why had he never searched for her? Why had he allowed her to grow up struggling while he built a fortune worth hundreds of millions? The questions felt endless. David advised caution. You deserve answers, he said, but don't rush into a confrontation until you're ready. Unfortunately, someone else learned the truth before Amina could decide what to do. Within a week, confidential information leaked to the media. Reporters began calling both Amina and Samuel. Television channels speculated openly. Social media exploded with theories. By evening, the story dominated national headlines. Billionaire developer's secret daughter discovered after 3 decades. The attention became overwhelming. Journalists camped outside Academy offices. Camera crews followed vehicles. Commentators debated whether Samuel should have acknowledged her years earlier. Meanwhile, Samuel Karanja himself remained silent. No interviews, no statements, no explanations. His silence only fueled public curiosity. Inside his corporate headquarters, executives urged him to address the situation. Investors wanted reassurance. Board members worried about reputational damage. Yet Samuel locked himself inside his office and refused every request, because the truth was more complicated than anyone realized. 32 years earlier, he had loved Grace Adino deeply, but his wealthy family viewed her as unsuitable. When Grace became pregnant, Samuel's father intervened. Threats were made. Arrangements were negotiated. Careers were placed at risk. In the end, Samuel chose ambition over responsibility. It was the greatest regret of his life. And now that decision had finally returned demanding payment. While the media searched for headlines, Samuel stared at a photograph of Grace hidden inside his desk drawer for decades. The face looking back at him carried memories he had spent years trying to bury. And somewhere across the city, the daughter he never knew was preparing to ask questions he feared answering. As the media frenzy intensified, another threat emerged from an unexpected direction. Victor Okoye realized a family revelation created an opportunity. If handled correctly, it could destroy both Amina's credibility and David Mensa's Academy project. Victor secretly instructed members of his communications team to spread a new narrative. According to the rumors, Amina's rise had nothing to do with talent. She had supposedly received special treatment because of powerful family connections. The accusations were completely false. David had selected her months before anyone knew the truth about her biological father. Yet, misinformation spreads quickly when people want to believe it. Some sponsors began asking uncomfortable questions. A few students worried the Academy's reputation might suffer. Amina felt exhausted. Every achievement she earned through years of hard work suddenly seemed overshadowed by a story she never asked for. One afternoon, she arrived at headquarters and found dozens of reporters waiting outside. Microphones extended toward her from every direction. Questions flew relentlessly. Did your father help fund the academies? Were you aware of your connection before now? Did David Mensa know? Security escorted her inside, but the damage was already happening. That evening, she met with David. For the first time since they met, she looked defeated. Maybe Victor is right, she said quietly. Maybe my presence is becoming a distraction. David immediately shook his head. No. His voice carried unusual intensity. People are attacking you because they can't attack your work. The academies are succeeding. Students are succeeding. That's what threatens them. He paused before adding something she would never forget. Never allow someone else's lies to make you question your own truth. Those words strengthened her resolve. Instead of retreating, Amina decided to confront the situation publicly. She scheduled a national press conference. If people wanted answers, she would give them herself. And for the first time, Victor Okoye began to worry. Because strong people become dangerous when they stop running from the truth. The press conference drew enormous attention. News channels broadcast it live across the country. Journalists filled every seat. Social media streamed reactions in real time. Standing behind the podium, Amina looked calm despite the pressure surrounding her. She spoke clearly and directly. She explained how she learned about her biological father only recently. She described her upbringing. She praised the woman who raised her. Most importantly, she refused to portray herself as either a victim or a beneficiary. Everything I achieved happened before I knew this information, she said. My work speaks for itself. The room fell silent. Then she surprised everyone. Rather than attack Samuel Karanja publicly, she extended an invitation. If my biological father wishes to speak with me, I am willing to listen. The statement immediately dominated headlines. But the most dramatic moment occurred minutes later. As journalists prepared additional questions, a familiar figure entered through the rear doors. Samuel Karanja, the billionaire businessman, walked slowly toward the front of the room. Cameras turned instantly. Reporters stood. Security personnel exchanged nervous looks. Nobody expected him to appear. Samuel stopped beside the stage and faced the audience. For several moments he said nothing. Then he looked directly at Amina. The emotion in his eyes was impossible to hide. I owe you the truth, he said quietly. The room erupted with flashes from cameras. Yet neither noticed. For the first time in 32 years, father and daughter stood face to face without secrets between them. And although nobody knew what would happen next, everyone understood they were witnessing a moment that would be remembered for years. That evening, Samuel and Amina met privately. No cameras, no reporters, no executives. Only two people connected by blood and separated by decades of silence. Samuel spent hours answering questions. Some answers were painful. Others were embarrassing. He admitted his failures openly. He described the pressure from his family. He explained the cowardice of choosing ambition over responsibility. He never attempted to justify his decisions. I was wrong, he said repeatedly, and I have regretted it every day. Amina listened carefully. Surprisingly, anger began fading as the conversation continued, not because the past changed, but because Samuel finally stopped hiding from it. By midnight, they had discussed everything from childhood memories to future possibilities. There were no miraculous reconciliations, no instant solutions. Trust could not be built in a single evening, yet a beginning existed where none existed before. As they prepared to leave, Samuel revealed one final piece of information. Years ago, he established a private educational trust in Grace's memory. The fund contained millions of dollars intended to help disadvantaged students attend school. Until now, nobody knew about it. Looking at Amina, he made a proposal. I want you to lead it. She stared at him in surprise. Samuel smiled sadly. I can't change the past, but maybe together we can improve someone else's future. Across the city, Victor Okoye remained unaware that his attempt to destroy Amina had achieved the opposite result. The scandal he hoped would end her career had instead united powerful allies around her. And while father and daughter began rebuilding something long broken, investigators working for David Mensa uncovered evidence of far larger betrayal inside elite threads. Evidence that could bring Victor's entire empire crashing down. The war wasn't over. In many ways, it was only beginning. The morning after Amina met Samuel Karanja, the city woke up to headlines that nobody expected. Every major news outlet carried photographs of their meeting. Some praised Samuel for finally accepting responsibility. Others questioned why it had taken 32 years. But while the public focused on the family story, something far more dangerous was happening behind closed doors. David Mensa's investigators had spent months examining elite threads, Victor Okoye's company. What started as a routine review of financial records had uncovered irregular transactions that stretched back nearly 7 years. At first, the amount seemed small. A missing payment here, an inflated invoice there. But as investigators followed the money, a disturbing pattern emerged. Millions of dollars had quietly disappeared through shell companies that existed only on paper. The scheme was sophisticated enough to avoid casual detection, but not sophisticated enough to survive a determined investigation. David sat in a conference room, reviewing the evidence late into the night. Around him, legal experts organized documents into thick files. Every page revealed another layer of deception. The most shocking discovery wasn't that money had been stolen. It was who had stolen it. The records pointed directly toward Victor himself. For years, he had secretly diverted company funds while publicly portraying himself as a champion of ethical business. Investors trusted him. Employees admired him. Industry leaders praised him. Yet behind the scenes, he had been using company resources to finance luxury properties, offshore accounts, and private ventures hidden from shareholders. When David finally saw the complete picture, he understood why Victor fought so aggressively against the Academy project. It was never about competition. It was about distraction. Victor needed the public focused elsewhere, while his financial empire slowly rotted from within. Meanwhile, across town, Victor arrived at headquarters unaware that investigators were only days away from exposing everything. He entered the executive elevator, carrying the confidence of a man who believed he still controlled the game. Employees greeted him politely. Executives nodded respectfully. Nobody showed any sign that they suspected what was coming. Yet as Victor stepped into his office, he noticed something unusual. 3 members of the board were already waiting inside. Their expressions were serious. The atmosphere felt different. For the first time in years, Victor experienced a sensation he rarely felt: uncertainty. And deep inside, a voice he had ignored for decades began whispering a dangerous possibility. Maybe the walls were finally closing in. Victor expected a routine meeting. Instead, he walked into an ambush. The board chairman wasted no time. A thick folder landed on the conference table. Inside were financial records, banking statements, and investigative reports. Every document pointed toward the same conclusion: corporate funds had been misused. Victor attempted to remain calm. Years of experience taught him how to control his emotions under pressure. But as the chairman outlined specific transactions, his confidence began cracking. The evidence was too detailed, too precise. Someone had access to information that should have remained hidden forever. "We're launching an independent audit immediately," the chairman announced. "Until the investigation concludes, your executive authority is suspended." The words hit Victor harder than any public scandal. Suspended. He stared at the faces around the table. People who once praised him now avoided eye contact. People who once depended on him suddenly sounded distant and formal. He realized something terrifying. Loyalty in business often lasts only as long as power remains intact. The moment power disappears, loyalty tends to vanish with it. Victor left the meeting furious. He blamed David. He blamed Amina. He blamed journalists and investigators. But deep down he knew the truth. Nobody forced him to steal. Nobody forced him to manipulate records. Every decision leading to this moment belonged entirely to him. Later that afternoon, television channels reported the suspension. Social media exploded. Investors panicked. Company shares dropped sharply before markets closed. Employees gathered in cafeterias discussing rumors. Some refused to believe the accusations. Others admitted they had always suspected something wasn't right. Meanwhile, Amina watched the news from Academy headquarters. She felt no satisfaction. No victory, only sadness. Because despite everything Victor had done, she understood a painful reality. People rarely destroy their lives in a single moment. Most destroy themselves gradually through thousands of small choices that seem harmless at the time. The difference between success and disaster is often invisible until the consequences arrive. As evening approached, Victor sat alone inside his office staring at the city skyline. For years he viewed himself as untouchable. Now everything he built seemed to be slipping through his fingers. Yet he still had one weapon left: information, and if exposing certain secrets could save him, he was willing to use them regardless of who got hurt. 2 days later, a shocking leak hit the media. Anonymous sources released confidential academy documents online: internal budgets, student applications, private communications. Within hours, journalists questioned whether the academy had handled certain programs appropriately. Although the documents revealed no illegal activity, public perception changed quickly. Critics demanded investigations. Sponsors requested explanations. Students worried about scholarships. David immediately recognized the attack for what it was: desperation. Someone wanted to shift attention away from elite threads and toward the academy. The timing made Victor the obvious suspect, but proving it would be difficult. The damage, however, was immediate. Several corporate sponsors paused funding agreements until reviews could be completed. Construction on 2 new training centers stopped unexpectedly. Staff members feared layoffs. Students feared losing opportunities they had worked years to earn. For the first time since joining the organization, Amina faced a challenge she couldn't solve through determination alone. Money was disappearing faster than new support could replace it. One evening, she walked through an unfinished academy building scheduled to open in 6 months. The structure stood silent beneath the setting sun. Empty classrooms, half-installed equipment, construction materials stacked against concrete walls. Hundreds of students were counting on this place. Yet without funding, it might never open. As she stood there, she remembered her childhood, the village, the long walks to school, the teachers who believed in her before anyone else did. Education changed her life, and now she refused to let politics destroy opportunities for others. That night she worked until dawn, contacting potential donors across Africa. Some declined, others hesitated, but a few listened. Slowly, support began returning, not because people trusted institutions, because they trusted her. By sunrise, Amina realized something important. Leadership isn't proven when everything goes well. Leadership is proven when everything starts falling apart and people still choose to follow you. The crisis wasn't over. In many ways, it had only begun. But for the first time since the attack started, hope returned. While Amina fought to save the academies, a betrayal unfolded inside Victor's inner circle. For years, his closest executive had been a man named Patrick N. George. Loyal, efficient, invisible, Patrick handled sensitive financial matters and knew where every secret was buried. Victor trusted him completely. That trust turned out to be his biggest mistake. Investigators eventually contacted Patrick with evidence linking him to several transactions. Faced with prison, Patrick made a choice. He cooperated. The information he provided transformed the investigation overnight. Hidden accounts, secret agreements, internal emails, everything. The evidence revealed corruption on a scale even investigators hadn't anticipated. Patrick described meetings, payments, and schemes in extraordinary detail. Every statement strengthened the case against Victor. When news of Patrick's cooperation reached headquarters, panic spread among remaining executives. Several resigned immediately. Others hired lawyers. The company that once projected strength now looked like a collapsing structure with cracks appearing everywhere. Victor received confirmation of the betrayal late one evening. For several minutes, he simply sat staring at the message. Patrick, the one person he never doubted. The one person who knew everything. The irony wasn't lost on him. Throughout his career, Victor built relationships based on fear and advantage. Now that advantage was gone. Fear no longer worked. Loyalty purchased through power disappears when power disappears. Alone in his mansion overlooking Nairobi, Victor walked through rooms filled with expensive art and luxury furniture. Everything he owned suddenly felt meaningless. Wealth could buy comfort, influence, status, But it couldn't buy trust once trust had been broken. For the first time, Victor faced the possibility that he might lose everything. Not just his company, not just his reputation, everything. And as that realization settled in, he began preparing for one final move. 3 weeks after the investigation became public, Victor made a surprising announcement. He requested a live televised interview. Journalists expected denials. Lawyers expected damage control. Investors expected excuses. Nobody anticipated what actually happened. Sitting beneath bright studio lights, Victor looked older than he had only a month earlier. The confidence that once defined him seemed diminished. The interviewer asked direct questions. At first, Victor answered cautiously. Then something changed. Perhaps exhaustion. Perhaps regret. Perhaps the realization that there was no escape left. Whatever the reason, he stopped defending himself. He admitted mistakes. Not all of them, but enough. He acknowledged financial misconduct. He acknowledged targeting David's academy project. Most shockingly, he publicly apologized to Amina. Millions watched the broadcast. Some believed him. Others didn't. But one thing became clear. The empire he spent decades building would never recover its former image. Later that night, after the interview ended, Amina received an unexpected phone call. It was Samuel Karanjah. He had been watching everything unfold. "The educational trust is ready," he said, "and I think it's time we think bigger." Samuel proposed expanding the academy network nationally. More schools, more scholarships, more opportunities. The vision was ambitious, almost impossible. Yet, listening to him, Amina felt excitement rather than fear. For months she had been fighting to protect what already existed. Now she saw the possibility of creating something even greater. Across the city, Victor sat alone watching the same skyline he once believed belonged to him. Meanwhile, Amina stood on a rooftop overlooking Nairobi with plans that stretched far beyond anything he could imagine. Their paths had crossed through conflict, but their futures were moving in opposite directions. One empire was ending, another was just beginning, and neither realized that the greatest challenge of all was waiting ahead. 6 months after Victor Okoye's empire began collapsing, Amina believed the hardest part of her journey was finally behind her. The academies were growing again. Construction had resumed. New sponsors were joining. Students from dozens of communities were receiving opportunities that once seemed impossible. Yet life has a way of testing people precisely when they think they have reached solid ground. One rainy evening, David Mensah called her unexpectedly. His voice carried a seriousness she recognized immediately. "I need you to come to the archive office," he said. "There's something you should see." An hour later, Amina sat across from him inside a quiet records room. On the table rested a small wooden box. Time had darkened the wood, and the metal latch showed signs of age. David explained that investigators searching through old hospital archives had uncovered additional materials connected to Grace Adino, materials that were never delivered after her death. With trembling hands, Amina opened the box. Inside were photographs, letters, and a worn leather journal. The first letter was addressed to her, not the adult woman she had become, but the child her mother never had the chance to raise. Grace wrote about dreams she hoped her daughter would achieve. She wrote about education, about courage, about kindness. Most of all, she wrote about never allowing circumstances to define personal worth. As Amina continued reading, tears filled her eyes. For 32 years, she had imagined a mother she never knew. Now that mother's voice seemed alive within every page. Yet one entry changed everything. According to Grace's journal, she knew her illness during childbirth might become fatal. Weeks before delivery, she secretly arranged legal documents ensuring her daughter would receive financial support. The money was never delivered. Someone intercepted it. Someone deliberately erased the arrangement after Grace died. Investigators soon discovered who. Samuel's father, the powerful man who had spent decades controlling family reputation. The revelation stunned everyone. Amina realized her life could have been completely different if greed and pride had not intervened. Yet strangely, she felt no hatred, only clarity. The people who heard her mother's plans were gone or broken. What remained was a responsibility to honor the sacrifice Grace made. For the first time, Amina understood her mission wasn't merely about success. It was about completing a promise her mother never had the chance to finish. The discovery of Grace's journal transformed Amina's vision completely. Until then, the Academy project focused primarily on vocational education and entrepreneurship. Now she wanted something bigger, something capable of reaching children long before poverty could limit their futures. Working alongside Samuel and David, she designed a nationwide scholarship initiative dedicated to students from disadvantaged communities. The program would provide tuition, mentorship, housing assistance, and career guidance. More importantly, it would focus on students often overlooked by traditional systems. Children from villages, single-parent households, remote regions, places where talent existed but opportunity rarely arrived. The planning process took months. Financial models were developed. Partnerships were negotiated. Government agencies became involved. Universities expressed support. The scale of the project exceeded anything Amina had previously attempted. Critics argued the plan was unrealistic, too expensive, too ambitious. Yet those same criticisms had followed nearly every meaningful achievement in her life. She ignored them. During a national education conference, Amina publicly announced the Grace Adino Foundation. The room fell silent as she explained the purpose behind it. She spoke not as a celebrity or business leader, but as a daughter finally honoring a mother she never truly knew. Thousands watched the speech online. Donations arrived almost immediately. Some came from wealthy corporations. Others came from ordinary people contributing small amounts because they believed in the vision. Within weeks, momentum became unstoppable. Schools across the country requested partnerships. Communities offered support. Volunteers joined the effort. What began as one woman's search for identity was evolving into a movement capable of changing countless lives. Standing before a crowd of students one afternoon, Amina realized something profound. Success isn't measured by what a person accumulates. It is measured by what remains after they're gone. And for the first time, she felt certain her mother's name would never be forgotten again. As the foundation expanded, Samuel Karanja faced his own journey toward redemption. Rebuilding a relationship with Amina proved more difficult than writing checks or funding programs. Trust developed slowly, especially when decades of absence exist between two people. Yet Samuel remained committed. He attended foundation meetings, visited schools, listened more than he spoke. Gradually, father and daughter developed something neither expected. Not a perfect relationship, but a genuine one. During a visit to a rural school, Samuel watched children receiving scholarships funded through the foundation. Their excitement reminded him painfully of opportunities his own choices nearly denied Amina. Later that day, he admitted something he had never told anyone. "For years I convinced myself I had no choice," he said quietly. "But the truth is I was afraid." Amina listened carefully. Then she responded with words that surprised even her. "Fear explains decisions. It doesn't excuse them. But people can still choose differently afterward." Samuel nodded slowly. It wasn't forgiveness exactly, yet it was enough. Across the country, public perception towards Samuel began changing, not because people forgot his mistakes, because they witnessed him taking responsibility. In a world filled with excuses, accountability stood out. Together, he and Amina visited dozens of schools. They met teachers, parents, and students whose lives were improving through foundation. Every success story reinforced a lesson both had learned the hard way. The future is shaped less by where people begin and more by what they choose after failure. For Samuel, that realization arrived late. For Amina, it became the foundation of everything she built. Neither could change the past, but together they could influence what happened next. And sometimes that is enough. 1 year later, the first group of scholarship recipients graduated. The ceremony took place inside a massive auditorium filled with families, educators, and community leaders. As students crossed the stage, stories emerged that reminded everyone why the foundation mattered. A girl from a remote farming village became an engineer. A young man raised in an orphanage earned admission to medical school. Another student launched a technology startup while still completing university studies. Every success represented more than individual achievement. It represented possibilities that might never have existed without opportunity. During the ceremony, Amina watched proudly from the front row. Yet one moment affected her more than all the speeches combined. A teenage girl approached afterward carrying a small notebook. Nervous but determined, she asked for an autograph. Before leaving, the girl said something simple. "Because of your story, I stopped believing my circumstances decided my future." The word stayed with Amina long after the event ended. Throughout her life, she had searched for purpose. She found it not through wealth, recognition, or business success. She found it through impact, through knowing that one person's courage could inspire another person's hope. That evening, national media covered the graduation extensively. Analysts praised the foundation's results. Educational leaders called it transformative. Yet Amina cared less about headlines than she once would have. The real victory stood inside classrooms, laboratories, and libraries across the country. The real victory was seeing potential become reality. As celebrations continued, David Mensa quietly approached her. Smiling, he handed her a framed photograph. It showed the very first academy class years earlier. Among them stood a determined young woman who had no idea how dramatically her life was about to change. Looking at the photograph, Amina smiled. The journey had been painful, but every step mattered. 5 years later, the Grace Adino Foundation operated in multiple countries. Thousands of students had received scholarships. Hundreds of schools benefited from new resources. Entire communities experienced opportunities that once seemed impossible. On a warm evening, Amina stood before a newly completed educational campus overlooking Nairobi. The campus carried a name she had chosen carefully: Grace Adino Learning Center. Students filled the grounds. Teachers prepared classrooms. Families explored facilities they never imagined seeing in their communities. As the opening ceremony began, Amina stepped onto the stage. Cameras recorded every moment. Journalists waited for a memorable speech. Yet her message remained simple. She spoke about sacrifice, about second chances, about the importance of believing in people before they believe in themselves. Then she shared the story of a young woman named Grace who dreamed of a better future for her child and never lived to see it. Many in the audience wiped away tears. Looking across the crowd, Amina noticed Samuel standing near the front. Older now, wiser, proud. Nearby stood David Mensa, the mentor who helped guide her through every challenge. Together they represented different chapters of the journey that once seemed impossible. As applause filled the evening air, Amina looked toward the setting sun and thought about her mother, the woman who left behind letters, dreams, and a sacrifice powerful enough to shape generations. Grace never saw the future she imagined, yet her love reached it anyway. And in that moment, Amina understood the final truth of her story. Legacy is not what people leave behind. Legacy is what continues growing because they existed. The crowd rose to its feet. Students cheered. Cameras flashed. And somewhere beyond the noise, it felt as though a promise made decades earlier had finally been fulfilled.